Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Christy Giles was born in Birmingham, Alabama. From an early age, she stood out for her determination, drive, and love for sports. As a teenager, she got into pole vaulting and quickly made a name for herself, eventually setting a national junior record. Her parents supported her every step of the way, and when she decided to trade sports for a modeling career, they didn't stand in her way. Thanks to her looks and magnetic personality, Christy advanced quickly. Over time, she signed with several modeling agencies, booked photo shoots, and started growing a strong social media presence. Around the same time, she married Jan Silliers, a filmmaker and producer. Together, they moved to Los Angeles to pursue their careers in the entertainment industry. By the time she was 24, Christy had built an impressive network of contacts, a solid portfolio, and a steady stream of projects. She was confident in her future. Hilda Marcela Cabrales Arzola was born and raised in Mexico. Her father worked in construction and her mother was a medical professional. From an early age, her parents emphasized education. Hilda was a top student and chose architecture as her field of study. She wasn't just interested in building design. Urban planning, public spaces, and sustainable development also fascinated her. After graduating from college in Mexico, she moved to the US to grow her career. She was focused, independent, and calm. Hilda worked at an architecture firm, was pursuing a green card, and working hard to establish professional relationships. She generally stayed away from the glitz of the social scene, but occasionally joined friends at parties to relax and stay connected to the energy of the city. The two met in Los Angeles, a city where cultures, languages, and ambitions collide. Despite coming from different backgrounds and industries, Christy and Hilda clicked almost instantly. They bonded over their honesty, open-mindedness, and strong sense of self. They messaged often, made plans together, and shared their thoughts. Christy was more outgoing and bold, always craving the spotlight. Hilda, in contrast, was observant, grounded, and composed. Their differences only deepened their connection. They weren't best friends in the traditional sense, but they trusted each other. Being around one another felt easy. By the time their paths crossed, both women were at turning points in their lives. They started spending more time together, sometimes working side by side, other times going to gallery shows or parties. For them, Los Angeles wasn't just a place to live or work. It was a space for self-discovery, experimentation, and meeting people from all walks of life. In this city, anything felt possible. Until the night, everything changed. Los Angeles gives the impression of being a city of opportunity, where media, fashion, and entertainment rule. Young professionals from all over the world come here to start their careers, make connections, and stand out. Christy and Hilda were part of that current. In LA, success isn't just about talent and effort. It's also about knowing how to navigate a fast-paced, competitive scene. Here, the lines between personal and professional lives often blur. Parties become networking hubs, and casual hangouts can turn into career discussions. New connections happen fast, often without time to fully vet someone's background. This created an illusion of closeness and trust, something that could easily be taken advantage of. Despite being cautious, the two women sometimes relied on gut instinct and first impressions, especially when dealing with people who knew how to present themselves well. The city's nightlife was a magnet, not only for artists and entrepreneurs, but also for individuals whose reputations raised questions. Some introduced themselves as producers, photographers, or creative directors, titles that sounded impressive yet often lacked substance. These individuals were skilled at playing the part, charming, confident, stylish, and seemingly well-connected. They frequently used their access to social events, shared acquaintances, and flattering promises to gain trust, especially from women. Christy was energetic and confident, quick-witted in new company. She had no fear of standing out, but always tried to stay in control. Her charisma wasn't just about image, it was a way to explore new opportunities. At the same time, Christy had a kind heart and often saw the best in people. which sometimes clouded her judgment. Hilda was more reserved, observant, and cautious when it came to making decisions. She rarely opened up and preferred to analyze a situation before forming an opinion. Her calm demeanor didn't mean she was naive, but if someone came across as genuine, she was willing to give them a chance. In unfamiliar settings, she relied on both instinct and logic, staying aware of her surroundings. On the evening of November 12th, 2021, Christy and Hilda headed to an art exhibition in West Hollywood. The setup was familiar, an art showcase with light refreshments, music, and guests from the fashion and media world. Both women appeared relaxed, confident, and in good spirits. After the event, they made their way to Soho House, a private club well known in the creative community. Access was limited to members or those with an invitation. The vibe inside was intimate yet vibrant. They met up with friends, had conversations, and ordered cocktails. At no point did anything seem out of place. They were comfortable, casually chatting, checking their phones, and sharing moments on social media. The club became a transition point between the formal part of the evening and what would turn into an after-hours hangout. At some point, they were approached by three men, David Pierce, Brant Osborne, and Michael Ansbach. They came across as self-assured and socially active. According to what they shared, they were involved in film and advertising. A conversation started quickly, and one of the men suggested continuing the night at his place on Olympic Boulevard. The women didn't commit right away, but eventually they agreed. There are reports suggesting that Christy and Hilda may have come into contact with prohibited substances either at the club or earlier, but there's no concrete confirmation. Surveillance footage shows them leaving Soho House around 3 a.m., getting into a black Prius owned by Pierce. The car didn't raise any alarms, and everything about the scene looked like a typical night out in the city. Neither Christy nor Hilda showed any visible signs of distress or concern. They looked well, composed, and in control. At that point, no one involved could have imagined how the night would end. In big cities, these kinds of choices often feel routine. Meeting new people is part of the culture, and most of the time, nothing bad happens. But in this case, the decision would prove to be a turning point. David Pierce introduced himself as a film director and producer. Brant Osborne claimed he worked as a prop assistant in television, while Michael Ansbach presented himself as a photographer. On the surface, they looked like typical Los Angeles locals, people loosely connected to the media and entertainment world. Investigators later discovered that Pierce had indeed worked in the industry, though his success was limited. He worked hard to maintain the image of a professional, using social media to network with models and arrange private gatherings. Several women later came forward, saying he had offered them roles in movies or invited them to exclusive parties. While anonymous complaints had been made about him in the past, none had resulted in formal action. Brant Osborne was more reserved. He worked behind the scenes on film sets and had contacts among technical crews in the industry. He carried himself with ease at clubs, struck up conversations effortlessly, but rarely stood out. His behavior never raised red flags. Michael Ansbach, the third in the group, worked in photography and video production. He generally stayed quiet, speaking less than the others, but joined in when needed. According to investigators, all three men knew each other and had previously met at various industry events. While talking with Christy and Hilda, the men acted friendly. They showed interest, talked about their work, and asked questions. Their behavior didn't cross any visible boundaries. There were no signs of aggression, pressure, or coercion. The situation unfolded quickly. In a matter of hours, two women, both conscious and seemingly in control of their actions, became completely unreachable. The morning of November 13th, 2021, began with growing concern among friends and family. At first, the silence was brushed off as typical after a late night out, but by midday, it was clear something was wrong. Christy wasn't answering her husband's calls. He was away from Los Angeles at the time, and she normally kept in close touch. Hilda had also gone silent. Her co-workers hadn't heard from her. Texts went unanswered. Their phones were either off or unreachable. With every passing hour, worry intensified. One critical clue came at 5:30 a.m. when Christy sent a single word, "help," to a shared iMessage group. It was a brief, urgent message sent to close friends without location or context. At first, it could have been seen as an accident or misunderstood, but as hours passed without any other contact, it became chilling, a final, desperate cry for help. That message would be the last sign of life from either of them. At 11:12 a.m., a black car pulled up outside Southern California Hospital in Culver City. Two men wearing medical masks got out, removed an unresponsive body from the vehicle, and drove off quickly. It was Christy. Medical staff tried to revive her, but it was too late. She had no ID. Her identity was confirmed later. Less than 2 hours later, a nearly identical situation occurred at another hospital, Kaiser Permanente in West Los Angeles. The same vehicle, the same two men, the same method. This time, they left Hilda at the entrance and again disappeared. Hilda was still alive, though in critical condition. She was placed on a ventilator and put into a medically induced coma. Her body showed signs consistent with an overdose. The hospital staff had no idea who she was. Only later were they able to identify her and contact her father in Mexico. Both women were dropped off at hospitals hours apart, alone, without names, without explanation. They were listed as unknown patients. This raised immediate concern among hospital staff and law enforcement. Surveillance footage captured the car, a black Toyota Prius with no front license plate. The driver's face was partially covered by a mask. He didn't speak to hospital personnel, avoided eye contact, and acted with urgency. Everything pointed to an attempt to cover their tracks. Law enforcement immediately began cross-referencing reports of missing persons with hospital intake records. That's how Christy and Hilda were officially identified. A criminal investigation was opened. Friends and colleagues of the two women quickly took to social media, sharing their stories and spreading awareness. Hashtags started trending. People demanded answers, calls for surveillance footage, identification of the driver, and explanations for why no emergency services were contacted. Christy's husband brought in legal counsel and began releasing posts aimed at drawing public and media attention to the case. Hilda's parents, still in Mexico, rushed to the United States to be by their daughter's side. By this point, the story had gained significant traction in the press. Public opinion was divided. Some viewed the events as a tragic accident, while others believed there was deliberate wrongdoing involved. In the early stages of the investigation, hospital security footage played a pivotal role. Though the driver had not yet been identified, both his appearance and the vehicle pointed to David Pierce. Investigators began piecing together the timeline, tracking the car's movements, and analyzing the women's connections to the men involved. The way Christy and Hilda were left behind violated not only moral expectations, but also legal standards. Under California law, any situation involving potential danger to life requires immediate contact with emergency services. Dropping off individuals at hospitals without alerting staff was seen as an attempt to evade responsibility and suggested that those involved were aware of the severity of the situation and were actively trying to conceal their connection to it. Investigators accessed traffic surveillance footage and were able to partially trace the Prius's route from the apartment on Olympic Boulevard to the two hospitals. The time gap between the two drop-offs was roughly 2 hours. This indicated a decision to separate the events and dispose of the victims one at a time. It also raised questions. Why was Hilda dropped off later? Why was she still alive? One theory emerged, that perhaps she wasn't originally meant to be left at the hospital at all, or that there had been an attempt to revive her before giving up. These developments marked a turning point in how the case was perceived. Before the traffic footage surfaced, it was still possible to believe this was an accident or a case of substance misuse. But now, law enforcement shifted focus. What had started as a medical emergency was now the center of a potential criminal case. Police placed Pierce and his associates under surveillance. The case expanded beyond a health-related tragedy. It now had the markers of premeditated wrongdoing. The next steps would depend on forensic reports, witness statements, and digital evidence. But one thing was already clear. This was no longer just a question of what happened. It was about who might be held legally accountable. Investigators began collecting evidence. They interviewed people close to both women. Christy's friends and colleagues confirmed that she avoided heavy use of prohibited substances, especially after losing several friends to overdoses. Hilda was also not known to use such substances, and those close to her described her as cautious and grounded. In parallel, law enforcement confirmed the identities of the other two men who had been with the women that night. Surveillance footage pointed to Brant Osborne and Michael Ansbach. With that, the list of potential suspects grew to 3. When authorities searched Pierce's apartment, they seized laptops, phones, external drives, and surveillance cameras that had been installed inside the residence. Some footage had been erased. Investigators managed to recover portions of the data and found that one of the drives contained videos recorded without the women's knowledge. This evidence would later become a key part of the charges. Testimonies also began to emerge against Brant Osborne. One acquaintance, after hearing details of the incident, came forward claiming that Osborne had bragged about what had happened. According to the witness, Osborne said the women had overdone it and that he and Pierce carried out the bodies. This individual provided an official statement which significantly strengthened the investigators' case. The toxicology reports played a critical role. The level of fentanyl found in Hilda's system was so high that doctors immediately pointed to an overdose as the direct cause of her medical collapse. Other substances were also detected, indicating a combination of toxic agents. The likelihood of someone ingesting such a mix by accident appeared extremely low. Investigators requested data from the suspects' phones. They discovered that shortly after the events, the men had deleted conversations, turned off location services, and wiped their browser histories. This indicated a clear awareness that their actions could have serious legal consequences. Doctors continued to monitor Hilda Marcela Cabrales Arzola daily. MRI and CT scans confirmed irreversible brain damage. Her condition remained stable but critical. She never regained consciousness. Her family was informed that the outlook was dire. Brain activity was minimal, and her body's basic functions were being maintained entirely by machines. Still, Hilda's parents insisted on continuing care. They held on to hope, praying for a miracle and trusting her strength to fight through. Her friends launched an online fundraiser to support her medical expenses. Hundreds of people from both sides of the border contributed. The donations helped cover the cost of treatment, legal assistance, and interpreters. Social media became flooded with posts demanding justice. The public was closely following both Hilda's condition and the unfolding investigation. Pressure on law enforcement and prosecutors intensified with each passing day. Her parents remained by her bedside around the clock. Each day brought both hope and fear. In later interviews, her father said he spent those days trying to understand what had happened, who was responsible, and why his daughter ended up in such a tragic state. Amid the devastating clinical updates, the investigation pressed on. Toxicology reports supported a theory that the overdose may not have been accidental, that it could have involved outside interference. This provided a legal foundation to classify the case as a potential act of intentional harm. On November 24, 2021, 11 days after being hospitalized, doctors confirmed Hilda's passing. Her life support was removed following a formal declaration of complete loss of brain activity. Her parents consented to donate her organs. This act of compassion became a powerful symbol of resilience and humanity. Even in the face of such deep loss, her family chose to give others a chance at life. Hilda's death dramatically changed the course of the investigation. What had once appeared to be an overdose now became a case involving 2 fatalities. The legal framework also evolved. Initial charges related to failure to render aid and attempting to conceal facts were now joined by more serious allegations, potential charges of involuntary or intentional manslaughter. On December 29, 2021, David Pierce was arrested at his apartment. The official charges: 3 counts of assault with intent, cases not directly connected to the events involving Christy and Hilda, but showing a concerning pattern in his behavior. 2 individuals had previously come forward with complaints against Pierce before the incident with Giles and Cabrales, but their cases had not moved forward. Now, under increased public pressure, prosecutors reopened those reports and included them in the ongoing investigation. Pierce was booked into the county jail and brought before a judge who set bail at $1 million. The families of Christy and Hilda strongly opposed the possibility of his release, arguing that someone with a known connection to restricted substances and who had already attempted to cover up serious events should not be granted freedom. Pierce's defense claimed the accusations were speculative and lacked direct proof tying him to the women's deaths. Next, Brant Osborne was taken into custody in Riverside County, where he had temporarily relocated. Osborne was charged with evidence tampering and failure to provide assistance. Prosecutors argued that his behavior reflected a degree of responsibility. Once transported to Los Angeles, Osborne was interrogated and later released on bail. Michael Ansbach became the 3rd person of interest. Despite his presence at the apartment and participation in the events of that night, he was not immediately arrested. Law enforcement limited their actions to questioning and surveillance. Ansbach claimed he had not consumed any illegal substances and said he wasn't aware the women were in danger. While his statements were met with skepticism, investigators didn't have enough evidence at that time to press formal charges. Following Pierce's arrest, the case was officially reclassified. The investigation now considered the incident not just as a fatal overdose, but as a potential criminal act involving non-consensual behavior and intentional harm. A critical development came with the discovery of video recordings that allegedly showed unconscious women being subjected to inappropriate acts. While these videos did not explicitly involve Christy or Hilda, they established a disturbing pattern of conduct attributed to Pierce. Christy Giles' funeral became a public moment of reckoning. The memorial service took place in Los Angeles and drew a large crowd, including family, friends, figures from the fashion industry, activists, and members of the media. Christy's mother delivered a powerful statement, calling for full accountability and justice. Her words were widely shared across news outlets and social platforms, adding momentum to the growing public demand for legal action. Hilda Marcela Cabrales Arzola, known simply as Hilda, found herself at the heart of this tragedy alongside Christy. Unlike Christy, Hilda was not in the public eye. She wasn't seeking fame or media attention. Still, her story resonated just as deeply. Hilda's death sparked a new wave of outrage. Initially, much of the focus was on Christy's case, but it soon became clear both women were affected by the same circumstances. Both were vulnerable that night. Both were caught in a situation they didn't choose. Hilda's parents chose not to engage with the media through high-profile statements. Instead, they worked quietly and persistently through legal channels, pushing for accountability and justice. Unlike Christy's family, who took a more public-facing approach, Hilda's loved ones pursued a restrained but equally determined strategy. They fully cooperated with the investigation, provided all necessary documentation, and maintained ongoing communication with law enforcement. The way Hilda was portrayed in some media outlets didn't align with who she really was. The narrative of her being a careless victim didn't reflect reality. What happened to her was not the result of recklessness. It was a reminder that even cautious, independent women can become targets of individuals who operate with calculated intent. Only after her passing did Hilda Marcela Cabrales Arzola's name become widely recognized in professional circles. The architecture firms she worked with issued public condolences and expressed support for her family. Some even established scholarships for aspiring female architects from Latin America in Hilda's memory. Even in tragedy, her name became a symbol of growth and support for others. The investigation into the deaths of Christy Giles and Hilda Cabrales began with major gaps. There were no direct witnesses, crucial information arrived late, and the individuals involved initially refused to cooperate. Solid evidence only began to surface after video footage and digital communications were carefully reviewed. During the search of David Pierce's apartment, investigators found restricted substances, syringes, and signs suggesting the use of medical-grade sedatives. This discovery raised significant concerns. Text message data and phone records revealed that on the night of November 12th to 13th, Pierce had been communicating with both the women and his associates. Messages exchanged after the incident showed the men discussing how to avoid consequences. In one message, someone wrote, "I think we're in serious trouble." This strongly indicated that they were aware something grave had occurred and were actively trying to cover it up. As investigators pieced together the timeline, a disturbing theory emerged. The substances may have been administered without the women's knowledge, possibly via injection or concealed in drinks. When pre-trial proceedings began, Pierce attempted to shift blame onto Ansbach and Osborne, suggesting they were aware of what was happening and had opportunities to intervene. In response, several former acquaintances of Pierce spoke out, describing him as manipulative, narcissistic, and prone to aggressive behavior. Prosecutors considered the possibility of offering reduced charges to the secondary parties in exchange for information that could strengthen the case against Pierce. The investigation faced significant legal challenges. There was enough evidence for arrests, but not enough for a straightforward prosecution. There were no definitive signs proving that restricted substances had been administered by force, nor was there clear proof of intent to cause death. Additionally, the defense maintained that the women had agreed to go with the men willingly and that none of them had been coerced. As the case moved toward trial, it became clear that the legal battle would be long and highly publicized. Prosecutors continued to gather testimony, conduct further forensic analysis, and recover data from digital devices. Meanwhile, the defense pushed to have some pieces of evidence deemed inadmissible. The families of Christy and Hilda insisted on the harshest possible consequences. Still, despite the serious nature of the allegations, the final outcome for David Pierce remained uncertain. The legal system moved slowly, and time often favors the accused. It took nearly 2 years after the tragedy before any concrete court decisions were made. David Pierce, the central figure in the investigation, was the only one of the 3 men to face full criminal prosecution. State prosecutors brought multiple charges against him, ranging from unlawful administration of substances and assault with intent to involuntary manslaughter. These charges stem not only from the events involving Christy Giles and Hilda Marcela Cabrales, but also from reports filed by several other women describing similar encounters. Despite this, no trial specifically for Christy and Hilda ever took place. The problem lay in the absence of undeniable, direct evidence. Investigators were unable to conclusively determine who administered the substances to the women or whether it had been done deliberately. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the fact that both women were abandoned outside hospitals without contacting emergency services and with no explanation. However, this alone wasn't sufficient to prove intent. In the end, the part of the case involving Christy and Hilda did not result in a conviction for Pierce. Still, he did not walk free. Pierce was found guilty of assault with intent in unrelated cases involving multiple women and was sentenced to over 10 years in prison. It was the only actual prison sentence handed down in the entire case. The other 2 individuals, Brant Osborne and Michael Ansbach, avoided serious charges. The more severe allegations were dropped, and they were only charged with interfering with the investigation and attempting to conceal evidence. Neither man admitted guilt, but both entered into deals with prosecutors, providing partial testimony in exchange for reduced consequences. As a result, neither served time. Osborne was released after a brief detention, and Ansbach was never taken into custody. Both declined to make public statements once the case concluded. Thus, the 3 men at the center of a widely covered tragedy emerged from it with very different outcomes. One received a lengthy sentence, not for the central incident, but for confirmed offenses involving others. The other 2 walked away with minimal legal repercussions. The families of the women described it as a betrayal of justice and a disservice to the memory of their daughters. Public opinion was on their side. Social media continued to share posts under hashtags bearing Christy and Hilda's names, calling for stricter laws and systemic reform around cases involving substances and aggressive behavior. A tragedy that began with a night out in Los Angeles ended in a courtroom, but the verdict left more questions than answers. For the families and friends of the two women, it wasn't closure. It was a haunting reminder of how easily a real crime can slip through the cracks of a flawed system. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.